How do you feel anger for someone when you understand why they hurt you? You know, like you understand them. There's this balance you need to feel this, to have the space to feel hurt, but also to be able to stay angry at someone when you can see the reasons behind what they've done. Like you have to process both things. My therapist has this phrase, and she says I have a high window of tolerance. I learned the phrase, went back to her one day and said, "Hey, do I have this? Do I have a high window of tolerance?" And she looked at me and went, "I've been trying to tell you this for years." Basically, I put up with a lot before I let myself feel any or express any frustration, you know. I just process my anger and put it to the side. By the time I finally reach a point where I'm like, I need to say something, the other person has usually reached the end of their rope in a very different way that's still connected to that. So raising my issue feels really late, feels like a cheap shot, feels like I'm just sort of throwing it out there to hurt them. And I just think to myself, I'll just be your villain. I'll be the villain. I don't mind that. I actually don't mind it. It's weird. Recently, I had a situation where the boundaries were really confusing. This person seemed to want my creative brain, then wanted friendship, and then they would like do these weird caveats to suggest that romance could be there or on the horizon, and it was all like, it left me really uneasy. I didn't know where it was they wanted me to land, and I didn't ever express this frustration, and I should have, because when I finally spoke up, it was too late. They were annoyed at me not being able to like manage this accurately. They were annoyed that I was dipping between flirting and friendship and deep conversations, not really knowing where to land, and then I said something and they lashed out at me saying something. And they lashed out in a way that felt really cruel. But the problem was I knew her history. The problem was I knew how she'd been treated by men. I knew how bad it was. And so, you know, a lot of the time it didn't feel like she was even really speaking to me. It felt like she was speaking to the conglomerate of me above me. You know, if I tried to point to the gout, it would be ignored, it would be jumped over. A lot of selective listening going on, which also only made me feel more annoyed, but I still kept understanding where she was coming from rather than my own feelings. At one point, I was sort of getting frustrated with how often I felt like I wasn't being spoken to. And I said, listen, I can do the same thing to you as a white woman. I can point out this trait of lack of accountability. But that didn't land either. She got annoyed with that. And I'm like, oh, I'm stuck here. I have no recourse to feel any feelings. And so instead, I'm just going to have to be your villain. And I'm kind of good at that. I'm kind of good at just parking my anger and my frustrations away. I even then like went through it with my friend. My friend has a habit of like really calling me out, and she'll like look through these messages with me and she's saying, look, I'll show you where you messed up. At the end of it, she went, oh no, this woman's lying, Jamaal. This woman is lying. And then like when I wanted to feel annoyed, I just looked at her and said, well, maybe they're not lies. Maybe this is how she like has to tell this story to herself. Is there intention behind these sort of mistruths? And my friend's like looking at me going, all right, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But like, it's true. Where does that leave a person like me? Where does that leave those of us with high windows of tolerance who understand them before we feel for ourselves? For 24 hours, I had a very visceral response I couldn't shake to this whole argument. But that's the complication of forgiveness in the moment. Like you can hold both. You can understand the other person and still know they hurt you. The only people that don't get this with me is family, because they've been pissing me off for 34 years. But yeah, sometimes the only move you have left is to just let yourself be the villain in someone else's story, even though you know the story is not true.